Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to do one of my favorite videos to plan and film, and that is if you like this, you should read that. This specifically is going to be focusing on science fiction. I have done a video like this before for sci-fi, as well as a couple for horror, so I'm going to have those linked down below. And I really enjoy filming these and planning them because I enjoy watching them as well. I always get great recommendations, and for the most part, if you've read the first book and haven't read the second, or read the second book and haven't read the first, I do typically recommend that they go either direction. Now, I'm not going to be repeating any pairings from my previous video, but you are going to see a couple of really popular sci-fi books show up again, but I'm going to have different pairings for them this time. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's start with a pretty popular one. So if you're looking for a pairing for Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, which of course is the popular dystopian novel about a boy who is trying to complete a group of challenges and compete in order to get control over the virtual reality known as the Oasis. If you're looking for something with a similar feel, I would recommend Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, which is a story set in a cyberpunk future where we follow a hacker who also works as a pizza delivery boy, and the story goes from there. Now, I'll admit that Snow Crash does not have the puzzles or the challenges of Ready Player One, and it also doesn't have the same nostalgia or 80s references the same way, but if you're looking for just that same feeling, that same vibe that you get from Ready Player One, I really encourage you to try this modern classic. I thought that it was just geeky and nerdy, and of course you get that virtual reality setting again. It worked really well. Now, for the most part, I do say that if you like one book and want to read the other one, typically these recommendations go in either direction. However, I do want to preface that for those of you that love Snow Crash, I don't necessarily think you'll like Ready Player One, because a lot of people will consider it to be a more watered down version of that beloved cyberpunk story. But reading Snow Crash, I definitely could see where Ernest Cline got his inspiration. And so again, if you're looking for something with that same geeky vibe, the same aesthetics, I think that you'll enjoy this, and it's a really good way to again dip into what would be more of a modern classic, but definitely a science fiction book worth checking out. Next, I want to talk about a booktube darling, and that is A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. This is set in a future where there is an ambassador that is sent off to a new planet to replace the previous ambassador who has died under mysterious circumstances. So the story is a bit of a mystery as they are trying to puzzle out what happened to him. And in this future, they are given technology, basically a brain implant that gives them the memory of the previous person so that they are not going into this new situation blind. However, there is something wrong with this implant and the memories are fragmented. They're actually 15 years old, and so she has to deal with that. If you're looking for a book that deals with similar ideas, I would personally recommend Nine Fox Gambit by Yoon Ha Lee, and this is a military sci-fi space opera that follows a woman named Cheris who in the army agrees to have the memories and soul of this past general tied to her body and tethered there, and so with that she gets his expertise, but he was also known possibly to be a little bit eccentric, possibly crazy, and was possibly responsible for killing his own men, and so she has to deal with his voice in her head. And that is the reason that I want to compare these two novels, is that if you really like the idea of someone having a second voice in their head, not just memories, but the ability to actually almost have a conversation with that other entity, I think that you're going to find similar vibes in both books, and they just have very similar feelings. They're very intellectual and cerebral in terms of the science fiction. It's also the kind of science fiction where you just need to go along with the story. The authors do not hold your hand, but you really learn about the worlds in a very organic way. And so if you enjoy stories that challenge you a little bit more, again, if you've read one, definitely recommend checking out the other. Next, I want to talk about The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson, which is a story set in a future where a woman is a traveler between different multiverses. You find out that she is very skilled at her job, and the reason for that is because in order to travel between the different worlds, you need to be dead in them, and due to her social status and life circumstances, she is dead in virtually every world, which makes her a prime candidate. And so within the story, she is going between these worlds, and there is a bit bit of a mystery that gets tied into all of that. Now, I'll admit this is a book that I wanted to love a lot more than I actually did, and my complaint with it is that despite the premise, there is actually very little insight or time spent in those other multiverses, and they all kind of felt the same when you actually got to experience them. So I want to recommend a book specifically for those that read that book and had a similar experience to me and are looking for another multiverse story. And so for that, I want to recommend Doors of Sleep by Tim Pratt. And this is about a man that every time he falls asleep, he wakes up in a different world. Sometimes they are paradise and he tries to stay there as long as possible, trying to stay awake. And other times it's terrible and he tries to rush and force himself to go back to sleep. He has a companion along the way, and together they explore all of these different worlds. And what I like so much more about this one is that the worlds are all so different from each other. I found them to be so interesting and creative and just not like our Earth. And so if you're looking for multiverses that are actually different, if you just want to see a whole bunch of creative ideas, this one I think will satisfy that a lot more, and I do feel like it's a bit underhyped, so hopefully I can put a new book on your radar. Next, I want to talk about We Are Legion, We Are Bob by Dennis E. Taylor. This is a really fun and entertaining science fiction story that is set in a future where a man basically agrees to have his brain saved for the future, so when he dies, he then wakes up to find himself in some sort of a new body, and he has to deal with a future that he is not prepared for. So much time has passed. I feel like this is another booktube favorite. A lot of people really enjoy this one, and I want to recommend in place of this to also try Defect by Nino Supri. This is a little bit different. So this is set in our current day and following an employee of a Swedish furniture store that is kind of like IKEA but technically not. And in this world, he has to take on an assignment to work at the store at night, and in order to help him do that, he ends up making clones of himself. Now, for those of you that know the Bobbyverse series, it's really not a spoiler to say that you do end up with multiple versions of Bob through circumstances. And so if you love that aspect to the story, if you love the idea of people kind of cloning themselves and making duplicates, and if you enjoy the humor that goes along with the We Are Bob series, I really think you'll enjoy Nino Supri's work. Technically, this novella is the second in a series, but it's a companion series, so you can definitely start with this one. Each book follows a different character, so you will not be spoiled if you just start here. And again, it's a really quick novella, so you'll just fly through it. And again, hopefully it's one that's a little more underhyped, so if you're waiting for the next book in the Bobbyverse series and just want something else to try, this one might be a really good one to pick up. Next up, we have The Stars Are Legion by Cameron Hurley. This is set in a future following a woman who wakes up without her memories, and she is sent off to a mission, and each time she keeps failing and has to go back and try again. You find out that she is going onto these spacefaring creatures, and they're basically where people have their home instead of a ship. They live inside of these creatures, and so there is a lot of gross aspects to this book, a lot of body horror, and this book also has a very prominent lesbian relationship between her and another character. And so a lot of people really got excited about this book, saying it was a queer space opera and also a very gruesome story, and it definitely sounded up my alley. And while I liked it, I didn't love it, I'll be honest. And so I actually found a book with a very similar premise that I feel like takes the same ideas but just did a better job of actually using them. So the book I want to recommend is Escaping Exodus by Nikki Drayden, which is set in a future where humans have left Earth, but again, instead of colonizing planets, they have chosen to colonize beasts in space. And the story is told over two perspectives of two women that are in love with each other. One is a woman who is destined to rule, and another person is a beast worker, so they are a lower class and not meant to be together. And so I like that this book also has that queer relationship, partially a lesbian relationship, but there's also a plural marriage and different aspects going on. And what worked for me was a few things. So for those of you that don't love body horror as much as me, I think that it's much more toned down. There are some gruesome, weird scenes, but I don't feel like it's meant to disturb the audience. I do think that Cameron Hurley's work is a little bit more aggressive in that term. And the other thing I want to mention is the fact that in terms of the story itself, I just think it flowed better. It had a really good narrative. It's kind of a science fiction story that reads like a fantasy, and I just love the space politics and the differences between the different classes, the conversations around social ideas and gender and equality, and just really love it. It's one of my personal favorite books, period. So if you were disappointed by The Stars Are Legions, or even if you loved it, I would definitely recommend trying this one out. Again, it takes the same premise, but it just changes it up a bit and kind of just executes it in a slightly different way, which in my opinion worked even better. Finally, I want to end by talking about a booktube favorite that is a graphic novel, and that is Descender, starting with volume 1 by Jeff Lemire. And this is set in a future where there are artificial intelligence that help out humans. However, before the story starts, you find out that there was a group of robots that appeared to come from space, attack the Earth, and understandably afterwards, robots and AI fell out of favor with humans, and so they actually went about destroying and shutting down all of the robots. Now the story follows a companion robot who wakes up in this future. They used to be the companion to a young boy, and now they are alone. They find out they are one of the last living robots, and they are going off to find little boy who is probably grown up by now. And this is a story that is just so wonderful in terms of the ideas it explores regarding artificial intelligence and personhood, but it's also so much an emotional story with love and friendship at its core. So if you're looking for a book that deals with really similar themes, I want to recommend Day Zero by Robert C. Cargill. And this is set in a near future where once again humans have created artificial intelligence, and the story is told from the perspective of a nanny bot, so an artificial intelligence that is shaped like an animal that is in charge of taking care of a young child. At the beginning of this story, you have a robot uprising, and so with that, this robot has to decide whether or not it should go along and fight for its freedom and rebel, or if it should decide to follow its programming and protect this little boy. And so you can probably tell from that synopsis that this book has a very similar premise. Once again, you have a companion robot at the front of the story. This book is also, just like the other one, very emotional, very much tied into the characters. It's a little bit different where in this story you have the robots that are the ones rebelling, while in Descender, the robots, at least at this point in the story, the ones that were created on Earth, are very much the underdogs, the oppressed. But despite that, it definitely works with the same ideas and again goes in different directions, so it's not a repeat story, but just if you like those ideas, if you're looking for something similar, this one will definitely scratch that itch. Highly recommend it, one of my personal favorites. So that is it. We've made it to the end of the video here. I would love to hear all your opinions down below. Are you planning on picking up any of the books I mentioned here? And you are also free to disagree with me. So if you don't like one of the pairings, if you don't think they work, that's okay. Let me know, or I'd love to hear if you have a better pairing, because maybe you have another book that I haven't even heard of, haven't read, that you think would go really well with one of these sci-fi favorites. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do read a lot of science fiction as well as fantasy, horror, and thrillers, and you can help me out by sharing this video around online. If you enjoyed it, you can give it a thumbs up, and if you hit that notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.